Alright, hello again to anyone watching these Kaijudo videos. Today I'm going to be doing another duel video. It'll be a match that I am playing with this Light Water Dark Nature pile control deck. I think anyone who's kind of familiar with deck lists and looking at some of the stuff on the Kaijudochannel.com, you'll probably recognize this list as David DiLorenzo's. I think there are a few changes I made, a few cards I added. But for the most part, it's pretty much taken from his list that top aided the Open. When looking at pile control decks, I was always a fan of kind of the light water dark base, and I really like how the nature stuff complements it. And I think this list was just that he designed was super clean. Just not messing around with too much big stuff. There's pretty much no bad cards in the deck. I think a lot of the time when people were playing the pile, they put just too many cards, too many things that were kind of conditional or not that strong to begin with, and they kind of diluted the deck. I think just this list, again, nothing really seems out of place. And it's just the whole nature package of the Sprouts, Reap and Sows, Mana Storm gives it a really proactive game plan where you're not necessarily relying on playing a super reactive game. You can take that sort of big mana ramp deck style approach and just develop into these Andromedas and Havens and close out games. I think 50 cards as well is just I find to be a really nice number. It lets you sort of fit all of the tools you could really need in the deck while still being pretty lean and allowing you to sort of find the important cards. So that would be kind of my take on this deck. I think there are some other cards you could consider playing. I think when looking at kind of the weakest cards in the deck, I think Skull Shatter might not have a place. I'm not too sure on this one. It can be strong in games like involving Reverberate for sure, but I think a lot of the control mirrors kind of just evolve into like just dropping Havens and stuff. I'm not sure how important Skull Shatter really is at the end of the day. Maybe I'm a little bit rusty and it's been too long since I've kind of played control mirrors, but I'm not really sure Skull Shatter really deserves a spot. Like it's only really good in the control matchup, and I'm not even sure how really how strong it is there anymore. That said, I think cards like Logo Scan was just like a one-of I threw in. Something like this can help you generate a couple extra cards, hit some more land drops. Maddening Whispers is a card I actually really like. Just like a really potent mid-range card that you can pull up in certain matchups. When you're playing mirrors, it's can be even more relevant than something like Skull Shatter, because you can sort of take out their last couple cards before they're able to resolve something like a Reverberate that they might be sitting on, or like very often they'll kind of crystal memory into a card and they have two left in hand. So if you can get this Maddening Whispers, I think it lines up a little bit more effectively. So I've been a fan of this card for sure. This deck is super spell heavy, obviously, which can be kind of a detriment. And I think this deck struggles a bit with like the Keeper of Laws, Cyber Scamp kind of core decks. I'm also kind of skimping on some blockers. I think I cut some of the Gloom Hollows, but we'll see how it goes. I guess with all that said, I could do a little bit more of an in-depth profile, but I haven't really played the pile too much recently, which is sort of why I'm going off of mainly David's list. But that said, again, I think David's list was super strong, super clean anyways. So moving into this match, we are looking at a match between myself and K-Rick again from the Rangers Dojo Discord. And as we see, he's playing, I believe, a 51 card Kalima deck, mono dark. We see already in his hand he's got the Necro, so he's playing some kind of nature variant. And I believe he won the die roll for this match, but elected to go second, which sort of makes sense. In the dark, he knows I'm a 50 card deck already, so it would make sense for him to want to go second with the extra resource, especially for a deck like his, which doesn't have card draw. He's going to be wanting to get up to he's going to need to get up to 8 to 10 mana to be casting his like Marks and his Kalimas and his top end. But without the card advantage to get there, especially knowing against another 50 card deck that's not going to be attacking his shields early, it's going to be a struggle for him to get up there, so he needs as many resources as he can get. So that totally makes sense to take second. But as we see, his hand is not going to be the greatest. A lot of defensive blockers that aren't super strong. And on my part, I've got these late game stuff. I immediately recognize he's playing a 51 card deck, so I sort of mana my defensive cards off the bat. And we see here, again, just a ton of 2 mana stuff, so a ton of cheap stuff. But at the end of the day, again, all he really wants to do is hit land drops, so it makes sense that it's not going to be too bad for him. Obviously, in a perfect world, or in a better world, he would actually draw relevant cards like Mesmerize, Spire Puppet if he's playing that. He'd rather have those, but it's not really a huge deal how strong your hand is in the early game, especially in matchups like this, because you're just going to see so many cards anyways, and these cards are going to have to go in mana, or a lot of these cards are just going to go in mana anyway, so it's not a huge deal. So we see him tapping 2 mana, and he elects to play, I think it looks like he's sort of thinking on to play which one he wants to cast, and he casts a Grudge Weaver, which I think is certainly a mistake. If he was going to cast anything, I would assume the Scavenging Chimera would be better. This Grudge Weaver is just not really doing anything. Like, he knows I'm a 50 card deck. He might think I know I've played a bit against him with some Esper kind of dragons lists, but those were all sort of 40 cards. So I would lean towards not casting anything if I were in his shoes. Not even this Chimera, but casting the Grudge Weaver I think is something I want to talk about. I'll probably make a video talking about casting blockers, and identifying like when to cast these defensive cards, because it would certainly make sense if I was playing like a 40 card Esper deck and he had some more information. Maybe I was playing like a tempo variant, he could preemptively play this blocker. But I think when you're not sure maybe what your opponent's playing, especially when there's enough information to kind of conclude that I'm probably on an even more defensive deck, you should really lean towards holding your blockers and playing them to react to your opponent's pressure. So if I were to go ahead and commit a threat to the board, he could then react by playing these blockers. But by playing them preemptively, it's only really good to do that if you have enough information to know that this Grudge Weaver is going to be worth the card. So if he had that information, this would totally make sense. But he doesn't really have enough information to conclude that this Grudge Weaver is a card. So by playing it here, he's effectively just discarding a resource from his hand. It might end up that like 10 turns from now, he would want this Grudge Weaver in play, but in general, it's going to be worth more as another option in his hand, or basically just another card to hit land drops with and use it as a mana. So I think playing the Grudge Weaver here is probably going to be a mistake on his part. Yeah, I think that would be a fair statement. Especially to especially because he doesn't really have like things he's going to be dedicated to spending his mana on. Another part of deciding to play your blockers preemptively like this without having like a clear threat that you're responding to is when you're looking at your mana and seeing that it's going to be tied up. Like if you had a Mesmerize he was going to cast next turn and then a Spire Puppet following that, there's kind of a risk versus reward that you're kind of calculating where yes, this Grudge Weaver might not be worth a card, but there's a decent enough chance that it is, so I'll commit it now because otherwise I'm not going to be able to commit it to the board until like turn 5 or 6 because my mana is going to be tied up. So you're kind of making the hedge that it's probably more likely than not to be relevant, and I need to cast it now because my mana is tied up. So that's part of the calculation you do when you're thinking about playing blockers proactively. But as we see with Kayrik's hand here, that's not really the case. Like he has all the freedom in the world to just sit back, hit land drops. His mana is not going to be tied up accomplishing anything over the next couple turns anyways. So he can afford to sort of sit back and not commit anything to the board. Because if there is a threat that I develop, he has the mana that he's going to be able to spend in the future. Um, so I think that's something worth thinking about, and those are some of the variables that you want to consider when you're deciding to play blockers like this. So I mesmerize and see kind of nothing much in his hand, obviously. It would maybe make sense to take this Terror Pit for later in the game, but it's like all these cards are probably going to hit the mana zone. There's nothing too threatening. I was mainly just looking to take a discard spell out of his hand if he had one. I think I would likely take the Scavenging Chimera here. That would probably make maybe the most sense, given that I already committed all these defensive cards to the mana zone. Yeah, and that's the case. So, yep. Just developing his mana, unlocking his civilizations. So we see that, yeah, for sure it's a Kalima deck, and I just logo scan, draw some cards. Mana Delira, which was, I guess, kind of interesting. I guess that makes sense. I just guess I felt like I didn't really need to commit it, but I think that might have been a mistake instead of just manning one of these Andromedas. Obviously, I ended up just drawing 2 more, so maybe that's hindsight, but we'll see how it continues. He's maned all his defensive cards, plays his Spire Puppet, which makes a ton of sense. And obviously, this was just a huge piece of luck on my part. I just top decked the Reverberate, which is kind of gross. I kept this Reap and Sow in hand. Obviously, I didn't want to commit it to my mana zone the previous turn, because if I drew something like a Tendril Grasp, a Full Metal Lemon, Sprout, there were so many more nature cards that I would rather if I'm going to be choosing between like which nature card I want to cast, it would pretty much always be Reap and Sow as opposed to like any other nature card I cast. Maybe Mana Storm I would mana the Reap and Sow, but basically like I wanted to keep it in my hand because I don't want to throw it down to unlock nature and then draw a Sprout when I could have just drawn the Sprout and played the Reap and Sow. So holding it there makes sense. Obviously, rips it out of my hand with with the Spire Puppet, so now I don't have nature unlocked, but it's not a huge deal. But yeah, I just peel the Reverberate, draw 5 cards, kind of disgusting. And now like Kayrik's kind of buried by my advantage. And like this is a situation where he's got all this top end, and we see how valuable it would have been for him to have this Grudge Weaver in hand. Just having that one extra card to commit to the mana zone, because then like he could, if he commits this Grudge Weaver, then if he had this Grudge Weaver, he could play the Grudge Weaver that turn in mana, and then the following turn he can just keep top decking and putting stuff into the mana, and he can keep all 3 of these high value cards. So he could have double Kalima and the Dracothane, but because this Grudge Weaver is in play, he couldn't do that, so now he's all of a sudden he's down this Kalima, where like that's kind of the trade-off he ended up making, is we see this Grudge Weaver in play and this Kalima in the mana zone. So that was kind of the result of this mistake, which obviously in a matchup like this where it's going to be all about card advantage and him trying to run me out of threats with these Kalimas, that's going to be incredibly relevant that he lost this Kalima or even this Dracothane. Honestly, probably, maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure if he should have kept, which one of these 2 he should have kept in hand. So we see myself mesmerize here. I spent some time checking my shields, I believe. And I ended up grabbing Maddening Whispers, so I didn't grab Mesmerize, which I suppose makes sense. I guess I figured like the fact that he managed, I think I kind of felt like because he had this Kalima and he's just going to be draw passing, I felt like he was going to be ending up on 2 cards next turn. So I know because he managed this Kalima, he has like 2 kind of big things in hand, or I can kind of assume that he's got like at least one big card and maybe some other stuff he's holding on to. So if I just get mad or mesmerized, I take one of them. But with Maddening Whispers, I felt like it would be a pretty high likelihood that he just kind of draws manas and passes back, and then I can Maddening Whispers the following turn. And then I also have this Sprout that I can cast now. I'm not even sure if I should. Kind of doesn't make. I don't know. I guess it makes sense. Like I have the option to play Andromeda, but it might not even be worth it to Sprout there because I'm not going to be using the extra mana anyways. Like I could have just waited, played this. Not a huge deal, but yeah. And as we see, like what I kind of said ended up playing out. He just mana passes, and then I just Maddening Whispers. So like I think the casting the Sprout was kind of irrelevant. I mean, all that ended up happening is like I have this squillies in my mana zone instead of in my hand as a result. Like I think that was something, especially in a matchup like this, like being down that one card in deck can actually be kind of relevant. So I think that was probably a mistake. I think getting the Maddening Whispers was fine. Like I'm not really in any pressure to cast this Andromeda. Like I don't need to commit it to the board. I'd rather just get as many cards out of his hand as I could. And like if I did draw something else like a Reap and Sow or another Crystal Memory, I could cast that alongside the Whispers. So I'm not sure there. And here I just cast the Haven. Looks like he's thinking about what to play between the two. Like he could cleanly answer this, but this Fortress is going to be pretty good with this. So maybe like he ends up kind of getting almost rewarded now. So we kind of see how this is. There's sort of a weird thing to evaluate. Like maybe it was a mistake. Maybe he would have lost this extra Kalima from hand anyways, but maybe not, right? Like he would have had that in hand, and I don't know. It's super tricky to evaluate what the right thing to do. But I think he would have still probably had this Kalima in hand had he not played the Grudge Weaver. Maybe in that case, like if he had the third card in hand, I would have got Skull Shatter instead of Maddening Whispers, which I probably would have done. So maybe it wouldn't have mattered. But it's kind of interesting to note. Like again, this Grudge Weaver here could be in the mana zone instead of this Kalima. And yeah, it's kind of holding this back, and it might combo well with this Grigorius Fortress. But he could have just had Kalima in hand ready to go, and he could mark it out if I commit another Haven to the board, or he could even... Like that extra Kalima in hand would have been so valuable. Because as we see, like I commit another big thing to the board. And I kind of see like he's got so many cards left. Like he's only been through so many out of 51 cards, and he's already got two Kalimas. So there's not like a super big likelihood he has another. And I think here I committed the Andromeda because I didn't want to play a Haven into a mark. Like I was kind of worried about that, but even then I maybe should have waited until I drew something else like a Strider or a Lemon to commit us alongside. So I think I might have kind of played that a little bit poorly as well. And I'm kind of surprised he played that. I probably would have marked if I were him in that spot, especially knowing like he can't really whiff. I think just taking the opportunity to answer it there. Like the Grigorius Fortress is pretty good, and it kind of gums up the board. But I think this mark here would have been better. You just answer the two, because now, like if I untap and I draw, and now I have blockers to commit to the board. Like if now I just drop a Lemon, drop a Strider, all of a sudden this Grigorius Fortress isn't really doing anything, and these marks, like now he's kind of lost the opportunity to really effectively answer these cards. So I think just taking the clean 2-for-1 there on his end would have been probably better. But I don't know, the Grigorius Fortress is still doing some work. Like I could Terra Pit it, but then I'm kind of going down on resources. I could Storm Spark and then kind of trade the Andromeda for the Grigoria and then maybe kill one of these other creatures. So I have some options. I could also just kind of wait, mesmerize his card, and then just sort of sit back. So yeah, I was thinking about casting the Haven, but I guess I decided not to. Hmm. I think in hindsight, I think it's pretty clear. Like I should just mesmerize his card, and then just do the Storm Spark play. Like just get this off the board. Like the Storm Spark's the most efficient since I'm trading like kind of 2 cards for 2 cards. Like just kind of half-assing it and just mesmerizing. Like if he just draws a Ripper Reaper, like I lose both these creatures anyways. I even thought about it, looks like. Yeah, I thought about it and I didn't. So that was kind of bad of my part. Like I don't know what I was thinking. I thought for a long time there and kind of just did nothing. I think yeah, for sure. Like I risked like just if he draws a Ripper Reaper there, I'm hooped. So that was just like I think that was really bad. I should have just taken the most efficient. I think I like kind of maybe tunnel vision on like thinking about Terror Pitting this when I like again I should have just Storm Sparked and 2 for 2'd, and then I get the card back anyways from drawing off Haven. Like I draw the card, and like now I'm in the same position that last like now I'm in the same position I'm in last turn where it's like, do I want to commit this extra Haven? Like what do I want to do here? Like I could have just already had like he would have just been on nothing. So I'm not sure why I made that play. It doesn't really make sense in hindsight. I guess maybe I was just kind of overwhelmed by the options or not super clear, to be honest. Here I Crystal Memory, have a lot of options. Get Piercing. Like I guess I'm like super paranoid and I don't want to give him like any opportunity to get any value out of this fortress. But I don't know, it still doesn't really make any sense. Like I'm gonna bounce the fortress, tap the Spire Puppet, and then kind of get the card out of Haven, kill the Spire Puppet, but then like he can commit the fortress the next turn. And he's still got this Grudge Weaver, and then then I'm gonna Storm Spark. Like at the end of the day, like I'm always gonna be trading like something for this fortress. Like I could have just got this all out of the way like 3 turns ago and been totally fine. So I'm really not sure like what I'm trying to accomplish. I kind of just wasted a Crystal Memory doing what like I could have accomplished with this Storm. Like I kind of just played this game badly, but I'm not sure. Like I guess the benefit to this was like getting to turn aggressive on a clean board. Like I think maybe that was my thought process. Like I was just really wanted to get aggressive for some reason. So I decided to make that decision. Like rather than committing all these attacks to clearing his field, I could just get this extra attack on his shields, and then getting rid of both the Spire Puppet and the Fortress like that lets me attack while not having to worry about him just going Fortress plus like a trade in, and it makes it hard for him to kind of clear my board. So I wanted to push aggressive, but and while he finds the 3rd Kalima, which is kind of lucky for him, like he's been through like what he's seen basically like 40% of his deck, and he's seen all 3 Kalimas, which is going to be really what he needs to stay in this game. So he gets a Kalima, and obviously he's going to mill all 3. So yeah, my play kind of didn't really make sense. Like I could have just had his board cleared, then committed this 3rd Haven, and then I would have had like that lemon as well, and then I could just remove this Grudge Weaver and probably kill him in 1 turn after that. So like I could have just like I basically probably would have won the game by now had I just Storm Sparked that 1 turn. So this game I played pretty poorly. But I had that Reverberate, which basically kept me in the game. Like, or that I mean, Reverberate is just a brutal card for him to deal with. So that sort of gave me the resources to and carried me through anyways. But I think like I could have won this game already had I just made the Storm Spark play. Then I got the Keeper Laws. I'm not even sure. I think I thought I had enough mana to follow up, like, go Haven Keeper of Laws in the same turn. I think I remember thinking that, but then I realized, like, wait, I only have, like, 13 mana, so I don't even know, like, what I'm doing. I guess, like, I didn't have that many creatures left anyways in my deck. Like, I've been through, I think, all my Andromedas, and, like, I don't think there were many creatures left in my deck anyways, and I just wanted to get this Keeper of Laws so that I could have like 2 hexproof things. That play didn't make sense either. I should have kept the Storm Spark over this Terror Pit probably. Yeah, like I have no idea. Like this game I kind of just I mean, actually, maybe not. Like, maybe keeping the Terror Pit was better. Like, it lines up better against the Scavenging Chimera at the end of the day. So, maybe I got lucky. Or maybe I made the right play. Who knows? I think here, I mean, it would just make sense. Like, I know he's got the Fortress in hand. I can just Terror Pit Mesmerize. Like, I was thinking I could just not care about this. Like, maybe that would have been better. Like, I just play the Keeper of Laws and then just pass even. Or maybe I do commit this. It probably would have been right just to play this, right? Like, I don't know. Yeah, like, I don't know what I'm doing. I just wanted to take him off as many cards, but, like, I could just play this Haven, and then, like, even if he wants to attack this Scavenging Chimera into my Haven, like, he could play Grigori's Fortress, attack the Scavenging Chimera, get back Haven to, or get back Kalima to his hand, and then, like, I can't really block the Scavenging Chimera, but that's fine. Like, I get an extra card. He ends up with Kalima in hand, but then I have this Mesmerize. So, like, I think that's something I thought about. Like, I didn't need to Mesmerize that turn because I could just Mes the Kalima that he gets back with Scavenging Chimera. But it probably would have been better just to develop this Haven earlier instead of, like, playing it super, super slow like this. Because he, like, has so many things in his deck anyways. And now, like, if he just drew, like, a Spire Puppet and then took my Haven, like, I think I was really playing super loose this game. And I think this attack from him, though, is kind of bad. From his perspective, like, I'm on 12 cards. He's got no pressure. Like, he's not going to win the game by attacking me. And certainly not going to do so if he's giving me extra cards along the way. Like, I could see, like at this point, he should identify his win condition to be just decking me out pretty much, and trying to run me out of resources. Like, he's got to hope that he draws, like, another Necros. He's able to get back a Kalima, and then he's able to use that Kalima to clear my board. Like, that's what he's got to be playing towards. Like, drawing stuff like Serpents, sitting behind these blockers, trying to survive. Like, it might be hard to do against this Haven, but I think that's kind of like the game plan he has to go for, is just running me out of cards. If while he's doing that, he builds up enough of a board where maybe he could consider breaking all my shields, he could do that. But I think at this stage in the game, like, his win condition has got to be just kind of try to run me out of threats and just draw the game out that way. Like, I've already been through a lot of my big stuff. Like, I've already been through, like, 2 Havens, right? Like, or maybe just a 1. Regardless, like, I've been through a lot of my threats anyways. Or maybe not even. I don't know. Like, he's just not going to win by attacking my shields, at least not yet. Like, he's got to draw the game out and then maybe make a push if it develops that direction. But, like, I think this kind of, like, it's not a huge mistake. He's just giving me 1 extra card, but it's sort of indicative of, like, a greater, or I guess, like, a fundamental error where he just kind of misevaluated the position, right? Like I think that attack on its own isn't a huge mistake. I mean, giving a card is a pretty big mistake in a matchup like this, so maybe that it is, but it's more so like an indicator of a misunderstanding of the position and what he needs to be playing for. So I think like the greater error is not kind of realizing how his path to victory, which again I think is just going to be trying to run me out of threats and deck me out, which is going to be hard to do, but he's just making the battle or even that much more of an uphill battle when he's giving me a few extra cards along the way. Yeah, I mean he's behind no matter what, but he's sort of digging an even greater hole if he's giving me extra cards. So yeah, here I just Lyra, which kind of sets up lethal next turn because I can play this and the laws, and now like if he doesn't play a blocker, then I mean I just have like the hexproof set up, and there's not really going to be anything he can do. But yeah, I think like this game I made a ton of technical mistakes where I just like I really struggled with like when to cast which spells and like properly dealing with his cards in hand, and like a lot of my sequencing I think was suboptimal. A lot of my evaluations of like the position, like I made a lot of like tactical errors this game where I just sort of misused my cards and didn't find like optimal lines. But it ended up not really punishing me, I think, because just like I have such an edge in the matchup, especially like the reverberate really being that card that pushed me over the top. So that was the first game. I think from my side, like a ton, as I kind of covered, like not storm sparking, some of the sequencing where I decided to like that last turn where I just Terrapit Mesmerize when I could have just committed a Haven. Like I think there was a lot of positions where I made suboptimal plays. Even smaller stuff like casting that Sprout when maybe I probably shouldn't have, because as we see, like if that game did end up going a little bit longer, if he was able to find like another Kalima off a Necros and was able to kind of nuke my board another time, like if it went a little bit longer and I wasn't able to muster enough pressure to actually win the game, I could have decked, and maybe having that one extra card, maybe that Skolache that ended up going to my mana zone instead of Sprout, when I really didn't need to cast a Sprout, like I didn't need the ramp because I was probably gonna Maddening Whispers next turn, right? If I wanted to cast the Andromeda next turn, it would have been totally fine to Sprout because it lets me do that, but I wasn't going to. So that Sprout was kind of loose. It just took a resource out of my deck that could have ended up being relevant that game and in the matchup. So I think those are some of the mistakes. I think you could probably find more. I think on Kaerik's side, there wasn't too much he could do, to be honest. Like I don't think he made that many mistakes. I think there was the attack with the Skak, which I think was sort of a misunderstanding of the position, and then I think playing that Grudge Weaver, it was kind of relevant when you were considering like how it kind of gummed up the board with Grigori's Fortress, and maybe how it also kind of left the door open for Rip Reaper to be a good draw at some points. But I think for the most part, it just wasn't worth the card, and it would have been gave him a little bit more flexibility, and maybe would have gave him a few more extra powerful resources instead of that Grudge Weaver. But he just didn't have a lot of decision points in that game. Like I had an abundance of options after that Reverberate, whereas he was sort of just kind of drawing and putting cards in to the top of his deck into the mana zone. So the second game, I believe he chose to play first this match, or this game, which is interesting. I think you would probably still want to be going second, especially when like he doesn't see the Mesmerize. Like if he doesn't have Mesmerize or any of the discard stuff, like you may want to go first to Mesmerize, be ahead in the kind of Mesmerize exchange, but I don't know. Like I don't think he really needs to be playing that game, and from his perspective, from his perspective, I think, like looking at this hand, you really just want to be developing into these plays. I think the Necros here is kind of demonstrated its sort of value in these grindy matchups, so I'd probably lean towards keeping this card. Serpens is kind of hit or miss. I might consider developing that. I mean, it's probably going to end up in the mana zone anyways, but I would lean towards keeping this Necros, maybe even more so over this Stinger. Like the Stinger generates kind of 2 cards of value and gets him up with ramp, which I think is really important. But like it gets 2 resources back, which is really powerful. But Necros can like develop or can get you back like an incredibly like a much more powerful resource. Like this is sort of, it gets you 2 extra cards, but one of them's like just the worst card in your opponent's hand, and the other is like a random card that's just going to be an extra mana, which may or may not even be relevant going into the super late stage of the game. Whereas Necros is going to get you back like a high value card some amount of the time. So I think I would maybe lean towards having this. And honestly, I would just be waiting. Like I would just be waiting and hoping to keep both of these cards. I'm not sure exactly which nature cards he has in his deck though, but I would just be speculating. I would be looking to mana these cards first and foremost. On my side, I just mana the Full Metal Lemon. I kind of considered keeping it in my hand just because, I mean, we can see how when you're lining up against Marks and Ripper Reapers and Kalimas, you really want as many creatures as possible. But I think I just wanted to cast this Sprout. Just because I felt like if I can get up to like 10 mana for Haven before he can really do anything, it's just really makes it hard for him to compete. And like I kind of get rewarded here because I draw the Reap and Sow, so now I can kind of go Sprout, Reap and Sow, which is a super powerful curve against him. And here, like I would just be looking at the Serpens and Grudgeweaver still, which makes sense. And we kind of see like I'm not sure if he sort of internalized the mistake he made in the previous game, but he's not looking to cast this Grudgeweaver. So he's passed it up the opportunity twice. So that might kind of demonstrate maybe he thought I was playing a different deck the previous match, which is why he kind of maybe in his mind his calculation added up to thinking it was probably more likely than not that the Grudgeweaver would have been good to have in play, which is probably why he committed it to the board. And now he's sort of adapted to where he hasn't committed to the board because he knows it's not going to be worth that card. So he's definitely made the adjustment. I think his mistake was sort of making that decision with too little information in the first game, but he's definitely adapted already. And I just Reap and Sow. I could have Crystal Memoried and been looking for Reverberate, but I don't think I'm like in a ton of pressure to do that. And like he could have like a Spire Puppet follow up. So I'd maybe rather leave. I don't know. It's kind of questionable. Like I don't really need to get the Reverberate now. I mean, the flip side of that coin though is like he's kind of demonstrated he probably doesn't have a Mesmerize. Like he probably doesn't have a Mesmerize, so maybe I want to get like the memory into Reverberate as soon as possible before he draws one. So I think delaying getting it might be a problem, but like I wouldn't be able to cast it for 2 turns anyways. But I don't. Now I'm gonna. Yeah, I think like there's probably an argument to be made when he shows he doesn't have Mesmerize to just try to search that up as quickly as possible. And here he does play the Grudgeweaver. So when I saw this, I definitely kind of like the alarm bells went off like that he probably has a Ripper Reaper for me. Like I kind of just assumed he had that. It could also be the case like maybe he just drew the Grudgeweaver and used the same thinking as in the previous game and just committed it to the board right away. But for me, it kind of signaled, especially going into turn 5, that he probably had a Ripper Reaper. But yeah, like even though he does have this Ripper Reaper, I don't think I would commit it to the board. Like it can maybe line up well if I commit something like a Keeper of Laws to the battle zone. But so we see me make like the kind of same play as previous, where I'm just aggressively reap and sowing. Like again, I think I should just be fetching out the Reverberate. I know I was thinking about it, but I just wanted to ramp instead. I guess I didn't put that much thought in it. But like again, I think like when your opponent's playing stuff like Mesmerize, like you just want to get it access to it before giving them a chance to draw into those Mesmerizes. So I think this is sort of a mistake again, and it's kind of compounding where now I've given them even more opportunity to draw into that Mesmerize. And like I could always cast these Reap and Sows later, and like it ends up kind of playing out kind of nicely where I draw into a Mesmerize off of that Reap and Sow that I can cast, which is kind of sweet. But yeah, like one of the problems with the way I played this as well is like we see me having to mana like two of these big creatures, right? Like I would have preferred to have this Lyra. Like again, I've talked about how like as we saw the first game go, like his deck can run me out of threats pretty well. So if he's able to keep on using Kalimas and Marks to wrath my board, I want to have as many creatures as I can to sort of insulate my havens and also just go wide. And if I had just fetched Reverberate and cast it, I would have been able to, I think, cast it this turn, I want to say. Like, yeah, I would have just been casting it this turn. Like, maybe I would have maned this Lyra. Maybe I wouldn't have. Maybe I would have maned something else. I'm not sure. Like, obviously, it would have curved out a little bit differently with when you're considering these Reap and Sows. But the point I'm trying to make is that if I had just reverberated earlier, I would have so many more cards in my hand that I would have the luxury of being able to mana my spells and keep my creatures. But now I've sort of forced myself into a position where I have to mana my creatures to cast some of the spells. So I think that's kind of gone against me. Whereas if I had just reverberated, gotten all these options, I would have the luxury to sort of choose which cards I'm keeping in my hand even more, and I would be able to sculpt a much more appropriate hand for the matchup. So I think I'm kind of compounding a lot of these technical errors where, like, at the end of the day, I'm still in a good position. I'm still casting powerful cards, but I'm sort of giving my opponent windows to, I'm like giving up a little bit of equity with each kind of suboptimal play. So I Mesmerize. I take the Ripper Reaper. I guess like this Skak. Yeah, he's way behind in mana development, so I wasn't worried about that. And I just wanted to get this out of the way because I knew I was maybe going to be playing this solitary Haven pretty quickly. So I think that was kind of my thinking. So I wanted to get rid of the Ripper Reaper. And here... But it's kind of weird because I knew I was probably going to Crystal Memory. I think playing the second memory was probably a mistake in mana. Because I know he's probably going to cast the Skak. And maybe I just don't think this Squilly is going to be really good. But like I'm not casting, like again, this is another situation, like I'm not casting Haven next turn, right? Like I'm on 8 mana. Like I could have stayed on 7 mana this turn. Or even just... Like, I could have just stayed on 7 mana, keep all these cards, discard this Squilly Scourge to his Skak, and then next turn Reverberate, and then continue to curve out. Like, I already have a mana advantage on my opponent. I could just keep this Crystal Memory in my hand. Maybe it's not. Actually, it's probably going to end up in mana a couple turns later, but I think... I don't know. I'm not sure if I should have done that. So I get the Reverberate now. I could have even just gotten like a third Reap and Sow. I think I was thinking about getting a Reap and Sow as well. I could have just got the third Reap and Sow, got an extra card in my hand, gotten up to, and then set myself up for 10 mana. And then like he scacks, I have like an extra card, so I can either choose between that or the School of Scourge. But I think just getting the Reverberate makes a ton of sense. But yeah, like the Squelch Scourge is not super strong in the matchup. Like as we saw, I'm gonna have like a ton of extra cards on him, and he's gonna be top decking, so I don't think it's like super relevant. So I don't know. Maybe it wasn't. It probably wasn't actually a terrible mistake to play this memory. And I draw. Nice. Draw a logo scan. So yeah, I'm not super happy with how I played the early portion of the game, but it's kind of gone. It's gone fine for me. Like he just hasn't drawn. Like this is part of the problem with playing like a 50 card deck is like he's just not seeing the mesmerizes and spire puppets that he really needs to for this kind of matchup. But at the same time, like his deck is probably not built for this matchup anyways. Like it's got a ton of these defensive cards like Stingwing and Grudge Weaver and Gloom Hollow and even like things like Scavenging Chimera. Like it's just a super defensive deck that just tries to gum up the board. And in matchups when your opponent's not giving you extra cards through your shields, it's just super hard for this deck to like to get up to Kalima anyways, because especially when you have to commit all these kind of just poor blockers to the battle zone. Like it just makes it super hard to play your game plan when no one's giving you the extra cards. And we kind of see that. Like I just have like all the discard, all the card draw, and I do it much more consistently and much more often than he does. Like again, as we saw, like he can play this long game where Kalima lines up really well against my top end, but he has to get there, and very often like I just amass so many cards and and have all these discard tools that I can find. Like he just like you would think Kalima maybe trumps the Haven late game, but the problem is all the tools surrounding Haven just trump everything the Kalima deck's trying to do, so it never ends up really playing out that way, unfortunately. And yeah, we kind of see like he's just kind of keeping the big stuff, but I think here I was thinking about like I could just commit another Haven to the battlefield. I could Skull Shatter. Like it doesn't really matter too much. Like I think I liked Skull Shattering just because. I mean, maybe it's not the biggest deal, but no, that makes sense as well. Like I know he can't Haven, or he can't. Like if he had just has Mark, if he has Mark Kalima, that's like kind of bad, but for the most part, not much can really go wrong this game for me. Let's beat it up. So he elected to keep the Dracothane and maybe try to get some more value out of it, but like it wasn't going to be doing much in the battle zone anyways. It's kind of weird. I guess it makes sense. Kind of a weird use of crystal memory, but it gets the job done. And now I was like super worried about a Kalima, but yeah, as we see, yeah, he just doesn't have the cards. And that's the game. So, kind of touched on a lot of points there. I think there were some good mistakes to look at. I think this game, there wasn't really much for K-Rick to do. I think, like, again, committing that Grudge Weaver ended up not really being worth the card. So I think this is another kind of demonstration. Like, it can be okay to commit these blockers in the late game when they defend against these Havens and give you some time, like, to chump block so that you can get up to your Kalima. I think that's kind of reasonable. But, like for the most part, that this game just kind of demonstrated the matchup. Like again, I think Kalima is like a really strong tool to answer and combat Haven, but the problem is like the cards surrounding the Kalima, the cards you have to play to facilitate Kalima to keep to this monodark package. Um, like the quality of the tools around Kalima are just far far weaker than the tools that surround Haven, and because of that, like Haven just the deck itself just trumps the Kalima deck. Um, like you just, especially with the ramp package, like the Reap and Sows just let me get to Haven way before Kalima, and then I can build up my board of Havens before you can ever cast Kalima, and then I can use my discard to attack the Kalimas that are sitting in your hand that you're trying to get up to, or I can play my discard first and then play Havens. Like it's just really tough, and then individual cards like Reverberate just make it insanely difficult for Kalima to interact. Um, like despite all the top end stuff like Serpens and Necros and what else, like Dracothane, a bunch of all these big things, Gregorius Fortress, even though he's got all these big cards, like he's just not generating card advantage. So like it doesn't really matter. Like I would much prefer to just taking like a lean Kalima, like a 40 card Kalima list. I think it still has a lot of the same problems that a bigger version does, but I think you can at least bank on operating some of the working game plans. Like the games you win might be the ones where you go Mesmerize, Spire Puppet, play a Lyra, and then you're able to kind of get under the control deck, or maybe take them off enough resources that you can actually survive to a mark, and then maybe build up a board of mid-range creatures. So I think both Kalima variants would kind of suffer against this pile deck. I think both have losing matchups, but I think like the 40 card version has a little bit of a better chance because at least you can draw the cards that facilitate your working game plans a little bit more often. Whereas like a deck like this is just kind of full of blockers and big things, but you can never really piece it together in this matchup. But yeah, I think on my side I made a lot of mistakes that like there wasn't really anything like I think it was like a super big punt, but definitely I did not play perfectly. Far from it. I think there was a lot of opportunity to play better, and I think like I could have won the game like two or three turns earlier in that first match where I really kind of gave myself a big losing chance that I didn't need to. But yeah, that was another long match, a fun match to play versus K-Rick. I touched on a bunch of points. I hope anyone watching enjoyed the video, and I guess we'll see you next time for another video. I'm probably going to talk about the blockers maybe a bit more in depth, maybe not. I think I covered it decently well in this video. We'll see. If anyone has any decks they want to see played or see profiled, or any topics gone into, let me know those. Otherwise, thanks for watching.